Welcome to the inaugural talk show of Geetika and Vivienne, also otherwise known as Curry and ChilliPadi. International Women's Day is around the corner, and it's a wonderful opportunity to launch this first talk show that Geetika and I are holding called Real Women, Real Lives. We decided on this particular name for our talk show because both Geetika and I are professional women who also are married or was married before, have children, and struggle all the time with finding balance in our professional and personal lives. Now, while struggle is one common feature of life, it need not always be so. So in our talk shows, we want to address how it can be for women to balance their lives with aplomb and joy while continuing to serve the people around them. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my partner, Geetika, who will tell you a little bit more about herself and the topic for today's talk show. Geetika?
Yeah, thanks, Vivienne. So I'm Geetika. I'm the curry in the Curry and ChilliPadi. I felt this really needed to be addressed, and we haven't yet taken the time out to say this. And Vivienne is the ChilliPadi, small but very fiery. So this year's theme for International Women's Day is I'm Generation Equality, Realizing Women's Rights. And in conjunction with this theme, we wanted to talk about what does self-care and self-love mean to women. So I did this very interesting social media poll, and I got a couple of very good responses about taking out the time to work out, exercise, or taking out the time to practice whatever hobby or passion women are following. There were two very interesting responses that stood out to me. One was forgiving myself for the things that did not go as I planned. And I think that that's so important for us empowered women, you know. And the second response was having me time, which is only restricted to around 2 hours per week. So she would ideally like to have more, maybe say 1 or 2 hours on a daily basis. But for her, her priority is her family, husband, kids, work, home, and everything. So it's a bit surprising that, you know, in 24 hours, we can't even have a me time of 1 hour or 2 hours for ourselves. So yeah, Vivienne will just take this forward.
Yeah. Just last week, I had a relationship coaching dinner workshop, which is a monthly event where self-care and self-love was also the topic of the day. But this time it happened to be in a mixed gender group. And everybody there, including myself, realized how much these terms, self-love and self-care, are bandied about. And you see it in a lot of self-help literature, for example. But our realization was that we really didn't know what we were talking about. And that was very humbling. So when I asked what self-love really means to you, the most insightful response that we got actually came from a man, not a woman. So I found that very, very telling, isn't it? And so Gary, who was one of the participants in my group, said self-love is really empathy, which is, as you brought it up, forgiveness of myself of things that have gone wrong. And one of the things that Geetika and I discussed prior to just launching this talk show was how much guilt we actually feel just by taking that time off for ourselves. When you consider how much a woman actually does on a daily basis at her work, in her jobs, and for the people around her, 1 hour should not seem like a big thing. In fact, 1 hour is actually required because just as a taxi or a car would stop for a while to get refuel and rewired again to continue to run on the road, it doesn't make sense to see women who are human beings and who are not machines needing that same kind of self-care but not getting it. The second thing we realized was the lot of guilt that we actually felt was also partly due to the conditioning that we have, despite being empowered and educated and fully aware of the benefits of actually taking time out for ourselves. We don't actually practice it. We tend to forego everything because we're biologically hardwired, I think, to care for our children, for instance, and to care for our families. But the instinct, or rather the knowledge and awareness of turning the attention back on ourselves has probably been cut off because for a lot of times, especially when I was growing up at least, in an Asian culture, and I would suspect Geetika in your culture as well, the focus is never on inwards, it's always on outwards. And while that has helped generations of our families survive and do very well. Right now, because women are in a very unique position, our attention is both home-based, domestically, as well as externally based in the workplace and in the businesses that we run. For example, Geetika and I both have jobs, and we also run the business of Curry&ChilliPadi. How then can we begin to understand that the multiple things that require our attention really requires us first to pay attention to ourselves? After all, as one of my teachers used to tell me, you cannot give from a cup that is empty. You naturally can give from a cup that is overflowing with liquid. So what are some of the ways, despite our struggles, in which we empty out to the people around us? What we probably need to start thinking about is, okay, I may not be able to change the external factors that are calling for my attention, but how can I fill up my cup first? How can I actually turn the attention back to myself? And how can I deal with this issue of guilt, right, as I'm doing so? Geetika, any ideas?
I think the first most important thing that women need to think is about themselves. On our priority list, we are somewhere down at the bottom. So most of the women that I know are not even thinking about putting themselves first, and without realizing that this is actually going to hamper the other aspects in their lives. So if you don't pay attention to how you are feeling inside, you're not able to extract that hour, 30 minutes, or whatever time you think is suitable for you, for your own self. It's going to start impacting in the way your relationship with other people is going. You're going to be irritated in small things with the children. Now coronavirus is there, the kids' schools are closed, so what am I going to do? My husband is not sharing the home load, or other responsibilities, or I have a boss that's not being empathetic and is not giving me the work from home in spite of MOH advocating it. So all of these things will start to build up, and this irritation will start to build up and will eventually begin to affect us in ways that will be externally visible. So we first need to look inwards, contemplate where we will get that moment of happiness or satisfaction, and take out the time. If you try to verbalize how you're feeling and how much time you need to reset, I think that will okay, maybe you need to bargain and negotiate, which is totally fine, but at least you start that process of getting over there.
And I totally get where you're coming from, because often when we are unable to deal with ourselves and come to a place where we are centered and reset, the issues and the anxieties tend to accumulate. Now, if you're younger, in your 20s and 30s, the coping mechanisms tend to be stronger. But once you hit a certain age, like for me, the threshold point was 35. Post 35, I don't think I aged that much physically, but because of all the stresses that have been constantly bombarding me and not being really able to find me time, the effects are not just short term, it was very, very long term. For me, as you know, as my partner knows, it accumulated and became cancer. I would say that the onset of cancer began not just the 5 years before the cancer began, but the 10 to 15 years before that, when the patterns and the habits of the mind and the habit of serving without thought for yourself began to accumulate. And if it's not arrested in time, this kind of an accumulation becomes a habit. And then taking time for yourself and guilt that comes is never really addressed. So at the outset, I would probably say, for us to be able to start loving ourselves and caring for ourselves, we need to be able to look at what self-interest and selfishness is in a new light. What do you think, Geetika?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to have a better phrase for selfishness, and just start calling it, self-love, self-care, self-worth. Because if you don't be selfish or don't pay attention to self-care and self-love, it's going to eventually impact the other relationships of your life.
That's right. And one of the things that the discussion group last week came up with was we also need to reframe the way we look at self-interest. For too long, there has been so much negativity and bad connotations with the word self-interest and being self-focused. But consider how, even from a young age as an infant, we have always been inward-looking. Our needs, therefore, were met in that way. Now that we have the wisdom and the discernment of adulthood, it doesn't have to be either me or the other, but certainly as the very first step, me has to come first. Settle yourself, eat well. If there is an emotional charge building up, please dissipate it in whatever way you can, even if it's just doing shopping for an hour, just contemplating the scenery outside the window for an hour, going for a good swim, even sometimes just getting a haircut. Anything that breaks from the usual routine is and can be a form of self-care. And can you remember how it feels like to have nice nails, nice hair, and just having had 1 hour of a good foot soak, right? How do you feel usually, Geetika, after doing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one important thing that I'd like to highlight is when I have full day workshops, I need to have a lot of energy, you know, physical energy as well. And obviously I need to think on the spot also based on how the participants are. So I've made it a point to, you know, recharge myself the day before. I will not have any personal sessions, coaching sessions, or I don't do very heavy exerting activities before my workshops, which may come as a surprise to a lot of people because people know me as highly extroverted and, you know, bubbling with energy. But even for an extrovert at this stage, I need to focus on myself before my workshops so that I have the optimal output for my workshops.
Exactly. And Geetika is bringing out a very, very salient point and also experience and a sharing of her method to use. We both happen to be in professions where giving out is the order of the day. We have, in a way, we have chosen this profession because we want to serve. And in the same way as Geetika has done in various ways, I also make sure that the day before a big event, and sometimes even before an interview or a meeting, I take 5 to 10 minutes out where I totally focus on how I am on the inside, and I clear either through visualization or a short meditation, and a quick prayer, of course, for the meeting to be successful, that this is fine. Now, this may come as a surprise. Even a small technique like this actually counts as self-love, because when you are able to take care of yourself, it is so much easier to take care of the meeting and of the people. We are so much more present. And not just before meetings, usually after workshops or even after a very long work day, the next day, at least for half a morning, I also don't do anything. And in fact, there are designated days where it's just a detox day, meaning I detox from my work, I detox from even thinking about it, and I just be. And often I find that when I guard that day very religiously, the people around me begin to respect the boundaries that I have also set up. Like my children know that when mom goes into this detox mode, don't touch her. And they learn to just occupy themselves. We give them an opportunity really to rise up to their leadership, to the way they lead themselves when we give ourselves permission to rest. So it's not about if I'm doing this, I'm being selfish and therefore the kids are left to their own devices. Really, we also need to start thinking in terms of how much care our people around us really need. Maybe we need to also assess, right, our assessment of how we are assessing their needs as well. So lots of things that we need to adjust to balance between rest and work. Being a woman and an effective one and a loving one really needs to begin with how we are framing the situation in our heads, which is, of course, a very, very important coaching technique, by the way. What do you think, Geetika?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in fact, when we assess these relationships correctly, you'd realize that not only do people respect these me time that you've set for yourself, but also look forward to it, so like my husband knows that, after my workshops, then he will have a very devoted time for himself. My manager
Exactly.
knows, yeah, my manager knows that okay, when she's doing the workshop, then okay, we're not supposed to disturb her, but we know that after the workshop she's going to be like fully present, and she'll come up with even more creative ideas. So I think people begin to, realize and respect those boundaries also that you set. And you're very right about assessing what other people need. Sometimes it is just some of those mental barriers that we as women are conditioned to have. Uh,
Right.
yeah, because we are putting their needs always before us. But I think that needs to change. And we're already in 2020 and we're talking about gender equality. So we need to start making these small changes first within our own homes and within our own workplaces. And then can we begin to see that massive change all around the globe?
Yes, and I feel that that is a wonderful way to close our talk show by reminding our viewers, right, that the theme for this year's International Women's Day is realizing women's rights. However, realizing women's rights is not a matter of an external body like the UN, okay, or our governments, or women's grassroots groups or councils to impose these regulations on us. Change and shifts really begins with taking responsibility for our own needs and being able to take care of our own needs first at this level. Only by carving out these boundaries in this way will we be sending out the correct messages, because we do have to teach people how we want them to respond to us as well, isn't it? That when we are able to mind these boundaries ourselves, we begin to create a ripple effect around us so that people will start to realize that, hey, if she's creating that possibility for her and she's showing up with work and with herself and with her recreational life in tip-top condition and optimizing the service to the world around them, then they will, and the people outside of us will actually be inspired to do the same thing. It's a win-win situation for all, but the change must really shift from ourselves. And as a very famous guru once said, be the change that you want to be. And there's no other way to sugarcoat or change this particular fact of life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's be the change you want to see. And as women, we need to start feeling less guilty, speak up. Also, we need to realize that this change is happening. So people around us are not aware of how they could support us. So the onus is on us to verbalize the way we feel, what our needs are, what our wants are, to get to that place, where everything becomes the new norm.
Exactly. And really, this is what empowerment means. Empowering means being powered from the inside, where the shift happens internally, where you begin to make options, decisions, and choices, right, that serve to build you up with the long-term effect of building those who are our loved ones and those who are around us. So on this note, we hope you've enjoyed this particular segment with us. Geetika, any last final words for our viewers?
I just want now for all men and women, everyone is welcome on International Women's Day. Everyone to be gender inclusive, to start thinking of ways that they think now they will start putting out self-care and self-love. So please drop us your comments in the comment section, or feel free to message us about ideas or steps that you are going to now take on to start practicing self-care and self-love.
Right. And on that note, I'm just going to add on one little bit more. It is to say, how else can you also empower your bosses and the family that you live with, the people around you that matter to you, to empower them to support you as you go on your journey of self-care and self-love. So until our next episode, we hope to see you again. In the meantime, keep well, be safe. Bye.